"Can I buy you?" the mountain man asked the homeless girl. Her replies shook his whole life. The first time he saw her, she was curled up under the edge of the saloon's back awning, knees to her chest, wrapped in a coat too thin for the weather, and patched in places that said it had belonged to a man twice her size and long dead. Her hair was tangled, skin pale with cold, and the tips of her fingers were black with soot from the stove flue she'd been sleeping near just to stay warm. The mountain man stood across the alley, hands deep in his coat, boots rooted in mud that had frozen over, and he wasn't looking for anything, not food, not company, not trouble. But something about her, how still she was, how quiet, got under his skin. He crossed the distance without thinking, spurs silent, breath visible in the frost-heavy air. And when he stopped just a few feet from her and she looked up, her eyes were dull but unafraid, like someone who'd already seen every kind of man there was and knew there were worse things than silence. He didn't mean to say it. It came out wrong, colder than it felt in his chest. "Can I buy you?" he asked. Not loud, not cruel, just tired, rough-edged, like a man used to trading pelts for fire and not words for people. Her expression didn't change. She blinked once, slowly, then said, "You don't have enough money." He flinched, not because she was wrong, but because she'd hit something inside him that hadn't been touched in years. "That's not... I didn't mean..." he started, but she held up a hand, palm dirty, trembling faintly. "It's what they all mean." Then she stood, slow and stiff, and he saw how small she was, how thin beneath the bulk of the coat. "If you're looking for comfort," she said, "go pay a woman who's not half-starved." Then she turned, barefoot in the slush, and walked past him like he wasn't there. He didn't follow, just stood there, heart kicking against his ribs, words caught in his throat like fishhooks. He hadn't meant to buy her. He'd meant to help. But now he didn't know what he meant, or why her voice had cracked him open like a river breaking ice. And long after she disappeared down the alley, the words still echoed, "You don't have enough money." And he knew she wasn't talking about coins. She meant trust. She meant time. She meant something he hadn't had in a long, long while. And somehow, without laying a hand on her, she'd already cost him more than he'd expected to spend. He found her again 3 days later behind the freight station, huddled near a busted crate and chewing something hard like jerky or raw bread crust, her cheeks hollow and nose red from the wind that never stopped biting in that town. She saw him coming this time and didn't move, just watched with the same unreadable stare as he crouched across from her, hands empty. "I brought food," he said quietly, pulling a wrapped bundle from his coat. Flatbread, a tin of beans, and a small flask of water still warm from his saddlebag. She didn't reach for it. "You here to buy something again?" Her voice was flat, dry, and younger than he remembered, like someone trying to sound tougher than they felt. "No," he said. "I'm here to give you something. No strings." She narrowed her eyes. "There's always strings." "Not with me," he said, setting the bundle down and backing up slow, hands raised. "You don't owe me a word." She didn't believe him, not yet, but her hunger won out. She tore into the bread first, fast, like someone used to fighting rats or boys for the last bite. Then slowed down when she realized he wasn't watching to judge, just watching to make sure she didn't choke. "What's your name?" he asked when she finally leaned back against the crate, eyes clearer than before. She didn't answer for a long time. Then, almost inaudibly, "Lena." He nodded. "I'm Boone." She said nothing. "You always sleep out here?" he asked gently. "Sometimes behind the mill, sometimes the livery. Depends on how drunk the stable boys are. You ever think about coming up into the hills? He asked. There's a cabin, warm. Nobody else but me. You offering me work? I'm offering you shelter. She swallowed, staring into the dirt. Why? Because I asked the wrong question the first time, and I don't get to forget that. Lena looked up at him then, eyes sharp with suspicion, but edged with something softer. Curiosity, maybe, or disbelief. You said I didn't owe you a word. You don't, he said. But if you say yes, I'll ride with you out of here before the sun drops. She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, Nobody's called me by name in months. It felt wrong in my mouth. Boone stood slowly. It didn't sound wrong to me. And when he offered her the coat from his shoulders, she didn't take it. But she didn't run either, and that was enough to tell him he'd started saying the right things. The ride up into the hills was slow, not because the trail was rough, though it was, but because Boone made no effort to rush her, stopping every mile to let her rest or drink or just sit in silence, while the wind carved low over the rocks. He didn't speak unless she did, and Lena didn't say much, but she didn't ask to turn around either. By the time the sky pinked into dusk, they reached the clearing where his cabin sat nestled between two pines, its smoke already curling from the chimney like a hand raised in welcome. Built it myself, Boone said quietly as he helped her down. Mostly stays warm. Roof leaks when it feels like it. Lena didn't answer. She stood for a long moment, staring at the doorway like it might swallow her. Ain't no one in there but wood and time, he said, unlocking it slow. And the stove's already lit. Inside, it smelled of cedar and ash, clean but lived in. Fire still popping in the hearth, a kettle hanging over the flame, and a single blanket folded neatly at the foot of a cot that took up one corner. You can have the bed, Boone said, already moving to spread a second blanket near the fireplace. I'll take the floor. You're serious, Lena said, the words flat with disbelief. Reckon I am. You think I'm gonna believe you don't want anything? I don't care what you believe, he said without bite. I care that you sleep warm. She hesitated, hands twitching at her sides, then walked to the cot and sat, slow, her legs trembling just enough to make her pull the blanket over herself like armor. Boone didn't look at her. He stoked the fire, added another log, and lay down with his back to her, his coat rolled under his head. And they didn't speak again that night. But some time past midnight, the wind screamed against the cabin walls and the fire dropped low, and Lena stepped down onto the floor with the blanket clutched around her and whispered, I'm not good at being safe. Boone didn't open his eyes. I ain't good at talking, he replied. So we're even. She didn't laugh, but she sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his back. Do people ever stay? She asked. Sometimes, he said. Not often. I'm not planning to. Didn't ask you to. They didn't touch, but they shared the heat. One fire, two bodies. One silence, two wounds not spoken of, only breathed through. And by morning, when the snow started falling again, Lena hadn't moved back to the cot, and Boone hadn't told her to. By the third morning, Boone came inside to find her already up, crouched awkwardly over the stove with her hands wrapped around the old enamel coffee pot like she was holding a newborn calf. Unsure whether it might burn her or bolt. She hadn't asked how it worked, hadn't asked permission either. She just figured it out the way people do when they've lived long enough without being taught, slow, quiet, and with the kind of care that said getting it wrong came with consequences. Boone stood by the door a minute longer than needed, watching the way the firelight caught the loose strands of her hair and how her back curved defensively even while doing something kind. She turned her head when she heard his boots, not startled, just wary. "You drink it black?" she asked. "Ain't no other way worth drinking," he said. She nodded, then poured 2 cups with the slow, careful balance of someone still unused to being allowed near things that weren't broken. She set his down on the table and sat across from him like a guest instead of someone who'd slept 2 nights near his boots. He took a sip and nodded. "You figure that out on your own?" "Watched a cook at a depot once. Got slapped when I asked how long to boil it." Boone didn't say sorry. He just took another drink and muttered, "You got the time right." A small, crooked smile tugged at her mouth, the first he'd seen. She didn't hold it long. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, looking at her own cup. "I mean, really?" Boone set his drink down slow. "Because when I saw you in that alley, I remembered what it felt like to want someone to see you and know they wouldn't." "And now?" she whispered. "Now you're seen," he said, "and you don't owe me for that." She looked down, blinked hard, then nodded once. "You saying I can leave anytime?" "Door's never locked." "And if I don't?" Boone tilted his head slightly. "Then I reckon the coffee stays hot." They sat like that for a long time, steam curling from tin mugs, fire crackling low, and the wind outside howling like it had been shut out for good. Lena didn't say thank you. Boone didn't ask for it. But when she stood to wash the mugs without being asked, and Boone stood beside her to dry them with a cloth worn from years of quiet use, something passed between them, something without a name, but not without weight. And in the stillness of that shared work, something fragile but real began to settle, like coals beneath ash, waiting to burn. It was a week later when the knock came, just past dusk, sharp and too confident to be wind or wild animal. And Boone's hand found the rifle before his boots hit the floor, his body moving with the practiced quiet of someone who'd been surprised before and survived it. Lena froze by the hearth, half kneeling near the stew pot, eyes wide, breath tight. "Anyone know you're here?" he asked under his breath. She shook her head, barely. "I never stayed anywhere long enough." Boone stepped to the door and cracked it just wide enough to see a tall man standing in the snow, coat buttoned high, hat low, gloves clean. Not a drifter, not a raider, not law either. "Evening," the man said, voice smooth. "I ain't lost. I came looking." "For what?" Boone asked flatly. "Not what," the man said. "Who?" Then he leaned slightly and looked past Boone's shoulder, right at Lena, her face drained. "You're supposed to be dead," she whispered. Boone stepped in front of her. "You know him?" "He knew my father," she said, eyes still fixed. "Worked his cattle, laughed at his funeral." The man tipped his hat. "He wasn't much for mourning. Died with more debts than friends." "You robbed his barn before his body cooled," she snapped. Boone didn't ask questions. He stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind him. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I don't want trouble," he said. "Could have sent worse than me." "You sent yourself. Word's going round there's a girl holed up here with a man who don't ask questions." Boone's voice dropped low. "Not your business." "It is if she's carrying a name some folks still want to see buried." Boone didn't blink. "That girl hasn't said her real name in months. And if you were any kind of man, you'd let her leave the past where it belongs." "She's a walker," the man said with a grin. "That name ain't quiet." Boone stepped forward, rifle low but ready. "You've had your visit. Now turn around and forget the trail you took here." The man paused, then nodded once and backed away, boots crunching in the snow until they disappeared into the dark. Boone came back inside and bolted the door. Lena hadn't moved. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm not him," she whispered. "Not my father, not his debts, not his dirt." "I know," Boone said. "You're Lena. You're here. That's enough." She exhaled then, sharp and shaking. And when Boone stepped beside her, she didn't pull away. But she didn't speak again that night. And when he woke the next morning, she was gone. Boone knew the second the door creaked and her boots weren't there. That strange stillness that settles over a cabin when it's been emptied of something alive. Not just warm. Her blanket was folded, her cup washed, but the girl was gone, and the cold that slipped in through the walls wasn't the kind that firewood could fix. He didn't follow, not yet. He split wood, fixed the latch on the coop, stirred beans that no one would eat, and told himself she'd gone to town, maybe to the ridge for air. But by sundown, when the sky burned gold and no footsteps crunched the snow outside, Boone packed a satchel with a canteen, jerky, and the coat she always refused to wear right, then saddled his mare. He didn't leave a note. There was no one to read it. He found her trail within a few miles, light tracks that didn't know where they were going, boots worn thin, veering off the path whenever the trees grew too tight. She wasn't running. She was unraveling. He caught up near an old fire pit left from someone else's life, where she'd made camp without kindling and sat staring at the cold stone ring like it might light itself if she looked sorry enough. She didn't look up when he stepped down. "I didn't steal anything," she said. "Didn't think you did. Didn't leave to hurt you." "I know. Then why do I feel like I did?" Boone crouched beside the dead fire and unwrapped a dry pine bundle from his coat. "Because you think leaving's safer than being sent away." She looked at him then, tired, hollowed, angry at herself. That man. He said my name like it belonged to him, like my father's dirt is still under my nails. Boone struck the flint, coaxed flame into smoke, then fire. "You left his name behind the day you said Lena and made it mean something new." "And what if I ruin it?" she whispered. Boone met her eyes. "Then we fix it together." She didn't cry. She never cried, but her voice cracked when she said, "You didn't have to come." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." She didn't say thank you. She just moved closer to the fire, and when Boone handed her the coat, she didn't argue this time. She pulled it over her shoulders and leaned in without touching him. That night, beneath a sky thick with stars and cold as guilt, two people who didn't believe in second chances built their first fire together from nothing but kindling and decision. And in the silence between them, something began to heal. Lena woke to the sound of Boone splitting kindling beside the cold fire, not with anger, but with rhythm. Like a man keeping his hands busy to hush the ache that still lived somewhere behind his ribs. She didn't speak at first, just watched how he moved, shoulders strong, breath steady, eyes clear, as if this wasn't just a stranger who'd found her, but a man who decided not to let her be lost again. She stood slowly, her legs stiff from sleep and frost, and without asking, took the wood from his hands to stack beside the stone ring. He looked at her and nodded once, saying more with that gesture than any soft word could have held. When the fire caught again, she sat beside it and said, "You're not who I thought you were." Boone raised a brow. "And who was that?" "Another man trying to make me feel safe just so I'd owe him. And now? Now I think maybe you're trying to make me feel strong so I don't owe anyone ever again." Boone didn't answer. He just broke a piece of jerky in half and passed her the larger side. They ate in silence, but it wasn't hollow anymore. It was full, like the hush between fiddle notes or the quiet before a storm breaks in your favor. When they packed up the bedroll, Lena did something she'd never done before. She reached into her satchel, pulled out a small frayed ribbon, and tied her hair back with it. "My mother's," she said. "I haven't worn it since she died." Boone didn't ask why. He just helped her onto the horse and walked beside her until the trail narrowed. As they crested the ridge, the town came into view. Still small, still mean, but no longer bigger than her. "You don't have to go back," Boone said. "Ain't going back," she replied. "I'm going through." "What for?" She looked ahead, to find something worth staying for. They moved as one now, not rider and walker, not savior and saved, but two souls tracking the same horizon. Boone didn't need to know the name of what she was chasing. He could see it in how she sat taller in the saddle, how her eyes no longer searched every shadow for old ghosts, but scanned the road ahead for places to leave new ones behind. That night, when they camped beside the creek, Lena followed Boone's footprints into the water, barefoot and laughing, the cold slicing her skin like truth. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need it. She was already building a new name for herself, one step at a time. The town didn't recognize her at first. Not in that upright stride, not with her coat worn proper and her head held like she belonged to something larger than shame. It wasn't until she passed the corner near Mill Street, where a drunk once shoved her into the gutter, that a woman gasped and muttered, "Ain't that the girl who used to sleep by the station?" Word spread fast. Eyes followed her and Boone as they crossed the square toward the general store. Not with jeers this time, but with a stunned, hungry quiet. Like folks were trying to recall when exactly they decided she was less than them. Boone carried the sack of goods while Lena walked a half step ahead, chin high, braid down her back. When they reached the mercantile, the owner, a pale man with trembling hands and a mouth like a ledger, froze when she stepped inside. You got coin?" he asked, not out of politeness, but habit. Lena placed 2 silver dollars on the counter, steady and slow. "I'm not here for credit." He looked down, then nodded. "Take what you need." She gathered flour, salt, and a tin of tea. Boone said nothing. He let her do the talking, and when they left, he didn't look back. But Lena did. She turned to face the people gathering at the windows, the whispers forming like frost on glass. "I ain't the girl you let freeze behind the livery," she called out, her voice cutting clean through the street. "That girl died the night she gave up waiting on mercy." Silence. Then a door creaked open, and an older woman, bent, wrinkled, wearing black, stepped out with a blanket folded in her arms. "I sewed this for my granddaughter," she said. "But she's grown and gone now. Maybe it could be yours." Lena stepped forward, took the blanket without flinching. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not for the cloth. For seeing me." Boone said nothing until they passed the last building, the hills rising again beyond the church. "You didn't have to speak." "I did," she replied, "because silence is how they win." That night, in the cabin again, Lena sat by the fire, sewing a patch on the old cot blanket. "They're not going to forget," she said. "Good," Boone replied. "Neither will you." Outside, snow began to fall again, not heavy, not cruel, just quiet enough to bury the last footprints of the girl they'd mistaken for gone. Inside, 2 mugs steamed, and Lena no longer flinched at the sound of boots. The town had seen her, but more importantly, she had seen herself, and decided to stay visible. Boone didn't ask where she'd been when she returned with a ragged canvas sign tucked under her arm. The sun was slipping low behind the hills, casting the porch in gold, and the stew on the stove smelled like something earned. Lena walked up the steps slow, every bootstep deliberate, her shoulders loose, not with exhaustion, but with a kind of knowing. "You mind if I hang this?" she asked, holding up the sign. It was barely readable, half the paint faded, but Boone recognized the shape. Old churchwood, likely taken from a mission gate, long fallen to time. Scrawled across the plank in bold, shaky letters were 3 words: "Second Start Cabin." Boone looked at her for a long time, then stepped aside so she could hammer it above the door. When the last nail tapped in, Lena stood back and stared at it like she'd just carved her name into the land itself. "Why that name?" Boone asked. "Because it's what it is," she said. "Not a fresh start, too clean. Not a last chance, too desperate. Second start, one you pick for yourself." Inside, the fire cracked low, and Boone ladled stew into 2 tin bowls. She sat beside him, close enough for shoulders to brush, but not needing to hold anything just yet. Trust didn't come in a flood. It came like water from a dry pump, slow, earned, precious. She took a bite, then another, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "You still think you can buy me?" Boone swallowed, met her eyes. "I don't want to buy you." "Good." She looked into her bowl. "Because I ain't for sale. But I might just stay. For the man who saw me before I saw myself." Boone didn't reply. He just smiled, small and crooked, and passed her a biscuit from the tin he'd kept warm by the fire. Later that night, as wind tapped the window panes and the moon stretched shadows across the cabin floor, Lena rose from the cot, walked to the door, and looked out at the snow. Then she whispered something, not a prayer, not a wish, just a name, her name, the one she chose, the one no man ever gave her. And inside that cabin, under the sign she hung, beside the man who never once asked her to be anything other than real, she let herself feel safe enough to sleep, and safe enough to dream. Winter passed gently that year, as if the storms had lost interest in punishing those who'd already endured too much. At Second Start Cabin, the days found rhythm. Lena rising before the sun, tying her mother's ribbon with quiet hands, boiling coffee that no longer trembled in her grip. Boone fixed the roof with his usual silence, but now he hummed low tunes under his breath, songs with no words, just warmth. The cabin grew a little stronger each week. New shelves on the wall, a wooden box for seed, a fire that never quite burned out overnight. Folks from town stopped by more often, not to gawk, but to offer things. A cracked skillet, a sack of dried apples, a new pair of boots from the widow who once crossed the street to avoid her. Lena took each gift with the same simple grace. Not like a beggar, not like a queen, but like someone who understood the value of being seen. One evening, Boone built a hearth bench from pine and set it beneath the window where light fell best. Lena sat there that night, watching embers dance while he read aloud from a torn dime novel she'd found at the market. She didn't care for the story. Too many gunfights and not enough truth. But the sound of his voice weaving through firelight made her feel like this was a life stitched slowly, honestly. As the chapter ended, she reached for his hand, not desperate, not claiming, just steady. He held hers without flinching, thumb brushing her knuckles like memory. "I used to wonder if I'd ever feel warm again," she said. "Not just skin warm, soul warm." Boone nodded. Some places fix the body, others fix the rest. "What's this one do?" she asked, eyes on the fire. He didn't answer with words. He just leaned forward, added a log, and watched the flames rise. That night, as the wind whispered around the eaves, Lena wrote her name in the dirt outside the cabin one last time, then kicked it away, smiling. She didn't need it written anymore. It lived here now, in the walls, in the coffee, in the way she laughed without apology. In this quiet place, where no one paid to own her, she had found something no man could steal: herself. If this story lit a fire in you, ride with us again. Like, share, and subscribe. And visit Crimson West for more true-hearted frontier tales.